Welcome to the Women Tech Council Student Innovator Mentorship Podcast Series. I'm Sarah Jones.
And I'm Sydney Tetro, and we are co-hosts of this show.
This show provides conversations with women mentors who came through STEM pathways and launched successful STEM careers. Welcome, everyone. So excited to have Vicki Fish today to join us on the show today. Vicki has such an interesting career, and I'll let her, of course, tell more about herself. But, she was doing genetics way early on. And now we've seen that industry just explode. And, obviously, I think big data's had a big piece of that and obviously scientific developments. But so, Vicki, introduce yourself for everyone and tell us, kind of what your path has been, and love to hear more about you.
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. My background actually started out early on in my undergraduate degree with pre-med in mind. And so my undergraduate degree is pre-med with biology as my major. And when I finished that degree, I worked for a couple of years in a tissue transplant laboratory, subsequently finding out that I was really averse to blood and had to continue on for so many years along the med school path was really probably not a good idea for me. And so at the time, genetics was really up and coming. It was the class that I enjoyed the most, but it was pretty new. This was the late 80s, early 90s, and we were still really discovering many things in the whole world of genetics. And so a new career at that time, or a new path of schooling, was genetic counseling. And so after I finished my undergraduate degree and worked for a little while in a genetics lab, I then sought out an opportunity to go back to school and get my master's degree in genetics with a focus in genetic counseling. And as I was doing that, actually a group here in Utah, Mark Skolnick, who had done some work at the University of Utah, and then spun off with some venture capital funds to actually be able to start a private lab, joined in the race to discover the breast cancer genes. And so right when I was finishing my master's degree in genetics, the breast cancer genes were discovered. And so it opened up a great opportunity for me, because I had a degree specifically in genetics, which wasn't so common, to have an opportunity to come on board here in Salt Lake City with Myriad Genetics. And then after being with Myriad for several years and having the opportunity to really work pretty intensely on the science side and the medical side, I noticed there were, some opportunities on the business side that seemed exciting as well. And so then subsequently went back to the University of Utah and got my MBA.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love how you've been able to navigate in areas that are really, more cutting edge. And what was that like? I mean, we obviously Women Tech Council is really interested in how do you navigate your career in areas that are a little bit more male dominated? And I guess I don't know enough about the field of genetics and what some of those business dynamics were like. But what was that like gender wise? And I mean, you're a vice president now and worked your way up. So tell us more of what that was like.
Sure. It was a journey for sure. I probably have some biased perspectives. The company where I'm working now has been pretty heavily male-dominated for the 20 years I have been there. I think that even now it's still not as diverse as I would like to see it on the C-suite level. I would say that I feel like working hard, knowing your stuff, being able to play at the table with anyone. So really stepping it up and, branding yourself as the most knowledgeable, the most insightful, the strongest work ethic, all of those things that potentially would pass you by, as well as learning to play golf, being able to stay up late and hang. These are all things where those were the opportunities where the jobs got kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of tagged to people, like handed out before they were even official jobs. That's where the conversations were had man to man about what you want to do with your future. And so a little bit of it was, being the best at what you do. And a little bit of it was, okay, you've got to really expose yourself and be able to talk about things, I think, that weren't typically things that I felt comfortable talking about. And what I mean about that is I find that my male counterparts don't have as hard of a time, I don't want to even say bragging, but marketing themselves. Mm-hmm. Look at all these really great things I've done, where I think I find myself, as well as my female colleagues, just saying, well, I'm just doing my job. Yeah. I don't need to tell you all the great things I've done, because that's...
Or you should notice. It's obvious, isn't it?
Right, isn't it?
Yes.
Right. And so I think that I'm still not great at it, but I think I've become better at self-promotion and marketing and really highlighting things that I've done to the people that matter, as well as those of my colleagues who I want to highlight as well that are female, that perhaps aren't so great at that. Mm-hmm. And it's not an easy skill when I think really intuitively and socially we are not naturals at that.
Sure. And in your industry, is it a pipeline issue, or is it pretty easy to transition into your industry? I'll just give you an example. Early on in my career, I was a patent lawyer. There's a pipeline issue there, right? Because you have to have a STEM degree, and then you have to, a law degree to be able to sit for the patent bar. And so naturally, there were very, very, very few women, and not easy for just anyone to become a patent attorney. So what does that look like in your field? Are you seeing a lot of new entrants that, or are there still barriers in place where it's going to affect the pipeline?
I think that it's a little bit of both. I think that whenever we have a high-level position open up, we don't even see female resumes coming in. And so it is frustrating. I will say we do have a lot of women that work for the company, but the majority of them are in positions that are tech support, customer service, or lower level. So when you get to mid-management or upper management, it very much thins out. And I think part of it is, in this industry, you have to have years of experience. And I think that, even personally, having these struggles with figuring out how to balance my career with my husband's career, with my children, with those social norms, even at home, that the expectations are that if my husband has to travel, he gets to go because it's his job. But if I have to travel, I've got to figure out what his schedule is first before I can get my travel schedule organized. And so part of it, I think, is having those years of experience under your belt. And how do you get those for some majority, I think, of women who either take time off to be able to spend time when their children are young, or don't take that job because it does require travel, or it does require extra time away, so that the, trying to set those expectations with your partner sometimes get clouded.
Yeah. I mean, the more I talk to people, and it really almost doesn't even matter what industry, right, that we're all sort of grappling with these thin pipelines into leadership when it comes to gender. And we're all trying to navigate, how do we integrate work and life and get enough time on task,
right,
so that you get seen for those opportunities. I mean, I think there is something to be said for time on task, right? And you got to figure out how to navigate that and get those opportunities. So let's talk about something a little bit more positive. How about a career highlight that you just feel like, gosh, if I wouldn't have taken this pathway, I would not have gotten that opportunity to make this impact. So tell us about one of your favorite stories.
Sure. So when I started out with Myriad, the company I'm currently with, I think I mentioned I had a master's degree in genetics and wanted to do everything I could to really be the best at what I did. And a big part of this new job was using my background in genetics to educate physicians and nurses and healthcare providers on cancer genetics. Well, what I didn't expect was to be doing so much public speaking. And so I think even just taking a leap of faith to start with the company, to get out there and really speak in front of either small audiences, large groups, at grand rounds at hospitals, at oncology conferences, and really putting myself literally on a podium to learn how to articulate, really take information and make very complicated information very simple, to spread it out, and make sure that you are able to, get different levels of audiences to understand the same information. And so I think that is really something that I never expected to do. And I think because of that, it also allowed me exposure to many other experts in the field. And so relationships grew. I was able to really build myself a great community of advisors, community of experts that I could tap into whenever I had questions. And from there, I think it made me better at my job. And so because I became better at my job and I understood the whole business aside from just the genetic side of it, it opened doors to other aspects of the organization. So everything from operations to digital marketing to, sales training, really just the spectrum. When you are able to communicate effectively and to take information and present it in a way that it makes sense, it's amazing what all you can do, regardless of what your degree is in. And so I think that was a really cool thing for me and has allowed me to see, lots of different dimensions of the business.
I love you sharing that because I'm even recalling my 2 degrees and not one communication class did I ever take.
Me
Right?
either. Isn't that funny?
How did you, I get to coach a lot of people, and there is this fear of, I'm not going to get on that podium until I am ready and prepared, right? How did you overcome that? I mean, it's a very natural fear. I totally get where that comes from.
I still get scared.
Oh, sure.
I do. Yeah. I think, though, what can help overcome that fear is practice. Practice, knowing your stuff so inside and out that even though you may stumble at first, you kind of start to get into a rhythm because you know what you're doing. And so I think that probably is the best advice, whatever it may be. And I too have done quite a bit of coaching, have also gotten quite a bit of coaching. And I think the best advice right now that I can think of in this vein is you have a personal brand. And when you come in the room, what do people think of you? Do they think of you as the person who's always going to be prepared? Or do they think of you as the person who's going to come in and have scattered papers everywhere, not know what they're talking about, the meeting's going to go long, this is really not going to be that productive because she doesn't have her act together. And so whether it's preparation for standing on a podium and giving a presentation, or whether it's even a 10-minute preparation prior to a meeting so that you know that you set the objectives up front so that you're not wasting people's time, I think really can help folks identify what your brand is as an individual, and I think that can go far.
Yeah, I think one of the maybe hidden secrets that we can share with some of the women in STEM who might be in university at this point in their careers is if you see somebody that looks polished and on, there's a lot of preparation that you never see behind the scenes. And I think that's such an important lesson to learn because a lot of people attribute to natural talent or this natural skill set that they don't realize that it's just that hard work of building that brand that you speak of, a very deliberate approach, right? And it's just in some cases years of work to build that.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here. What would you say is your personal brand?
Well, I would like to think that the things I've mentioned so far, such as being prepared, being on time, working hard, knowing if someone asks me to do something, it will get done and it will get done well. And I think that is, as a woman, sometimes great and sometimes a detriment. I think we have a tendency to take on quite a bit. We're multitaskers. So that's another thing I've learned. So as my brand, I would say I get it done well, and I get it done right. I also think that something I've learned over the years is you've got to say no when you have too much on your plate. I have made the mistake in the past in my career to keep taking on to the point where it started impacting my brand. I had too much to do. I I felt like I was 60% at everything instead of 100% at 60% of the things. And so I finally got to the breaking point, which is not a place you want to get to where it allowed me to have a conversation with my boss at the time, and things changed, which was good, but I think you've got to know when to say when. And so I think I waited too long, which is something I learned. But know how much you can handle so that you can continue to maintain that brand so that you can be whatever that brand is.
That's great. Well, I can tell you've definitely practiced because that did not throw you off at all. So this fine line, this fine line between how much to let other people see you sweat and how much to not let them see you sweat, right? I was reading an article one time around, I think, specifically when it comes to gender, if you focus too much on, this took you so many hours and the blood, sweat, and tears, it actually, the perception that it creates can actually be to your detriment, right? There's this interesting thing about capacity management, and that they might think that you're maxed out in your abilities or your capabilities or what additional things you can take on. So what's your advice in sort of walking that fine line of
Sure. I think one thing I have done in the more short term, like more recently, because this has come up for me, I look at this may sound silly. I look at the men at work and I say, okay, what is on their plate? What are they saying no to? How much is normal? And is it okay? And so I do now, I again, something I've learned from having different types of managers in the past, to set very clear expectations. Have my manager set very clear expectations. Have MBOs in place that are very specific so that I know what I need to do such that I am being successful for myself, for the organization, for the role. And so what I've found myself doing is if I'm being asked to take more on, inevitably, you will be, is to take my MBOs in to my boss and say, I am happy to do X, Y, and Z. Which one of these 3 things would you like to take off the list? Or which one of these 5 things would you take off the list? Because right now, here are the X number of things I'm working on. Here's my capacity. And if you want me to do it well, we're going to have to take one of these other things off. And so I've tried to outline it in a way such that when we start our fiscal year, we really outline what do we need to do this year to be successful for this particular business unit. And if that's the case, if there's something else that gets added, something's going to have to come off. And so when you set it up front, it helps that conversation go a little more smoothly.
Well, and what I love about that is it also engages, the other stakeholders in your priority management, right? Because then it's not you saying, oh, well, I can't do this all. Right. It's them saying, so let's make sure I understand what your priorities are so that together we can decide what comes off the table. Because it's not about, you, Vicki, your personal capacity, right? It's about making sure it's aligned to the business priorities. Absolutely. And I think anytime a woman can make sure that she's very focused on those business priorities and kind of show those types of strengths, it always works to her benefit, right? Shows her leadership. And it's I love that illustration of how to successfully do that. So let's talk about the field of genetics for a minute.
Sure.
Where do you see it going? I mean, you're in such an interesting driving seat with what you're doing. Maybe tell a little bit more about what you're focused on right now, and where do you see the industry headed?
So specifically, the world I am in is cancer genetics and molecular diagnostics. Right now, it's a really exciting time for molecular diagnostics. And to bring this down maybe into more layman's terms is if really answering questions like, do I have a disease? Will I get a disease? If I have a particular disease, should it be treated? And if it should be treated, what should I treat it with? So everything from looking at blood to see if you have a particular genetic mutation to looking in my business unit, specifically in dermatology, if you have a mole and you take it off, is it melanoma or not? And then in other aspects, for example, say breast cancer, ovarian cancer, if you have a particular type of breast cancer or a breast cancer that has a particular mutation in it, what chemotherapy should you be on, or which immunotherapy is best for ensuring a good response. And so I think it's a really exciting time. So that's cancer specifically. I think you can expand that into, other areas of medicine in terms of, what they're calling companion diagnostics or another area. So very specific with different medicines. So whether it's a companion diagnostic for chemotherapy, whether in arthritis, if you're responding to a particular treatment regimen, if you're getting enough, if you're getting too much. And so I think it really starts to individualize your treatment as a patient and to hope that based on your specific genetic makeup, instead of giving a one-size-fits-all drug, now it's much more precision medicine. And so you're able to really cut down for the expenditures on just trying a bunch of different drugs in terms of whether or not they might work. This is even expanding into the depression, ADHD, for different serotonin inhibitors, different ways that the brain uptakes certain medicines to see, instead of trying 3 or 4 antidepressants, to see which one your body best responds to. So it goes across the board, but it's really, I think, quite fascinating to see all of the different areas where genetics can play a role in terms of medicine.
That is fascinating.
And that's just the surface.
Yeah. So how would you recommend women or men who are interested in this field? What does that pathway look like? What do you recommend that they think about courses, degrees that really help build the foundation for a really exciting career in this area?
Well, I think that's the other exciting thing about an industry, and I'll call it maybe biotech. There are, I think, more and more degrees now specifically in biotechnology. There are medical engineering degrees. We have an entire building full of programmers. We have data analytics. We have biostatisticians. There are so many ways that you can get into this industry that aren't necessarily medical or science or your basic biology type, basic sciences, that can really provide an opportunity to get exposure into this type of industry. So I think that really find your passion, both as a student in an area that you're really good at doing, and then maybe through a mentorship or internships in the area where you are, to say, I think I have a skill that's really useful. How can I help at this company? Or talk to, I think probably a mentorship would be good, or even just networking to find out what jobs are available. I was amazed. We probably have even over 100 different degrees working at Myriad Genetics, from everything, like I said, from statistics to programmers to analytics to doctors to pathologists. It's amazing.
I don't know if you know this answer, but which roles do you struggle the most to fill? With all of the, you mentioned so many different types of roles. Which is the most challenging?
I don't know if I can answer that specifically. I think a unique skill set from where I'm sitting right now. Scientists are always great to have on board. We have a broad range of levels of science that are needed. So everything from accessioning our samples coming in the door, to sitting at a lab desk, to running our robotics, to signing out the test results. So MD degree. For me, what a unique blend is somebody who has some of that science, but also has maybe some business or marketing, so you can tie in those skills together to say, okay, I absolutely understand our product, I understand our customer, and I understand our business. And so that type of background is really useful, because you can go all over the company. Or, again, somebody who has a computer science background, but then maybe has some exposure to some of the clinical side of things, because then they can better help improve our systems, because they either, have been a patient themselves and understand how difficult the process can be when trying to get this information, or have done an internship at perhaps a clinic, and so they know some of the struggles. We even work with different hospital organizations to help them be more productive. If you are able to incorporate these types of diagnostics into where you are, we can help that process become more lean. So we have even Six Sigma experts.
Wow.
I mean, it's quite amazing.
Yeah, that is fascinating.
The spectrum.
Well, I think a common theme I'm hearing, and even in your own career, is that we're not just getting STEM degrees anymore, right? And just doing STEM. We are, crossing it with business or marketing or computer science or big data, and it is to people's benefit to really think about like how those crossovers happen and how to navigate that in your own personal career, so that you can be like you're currently doing, right? Driving the strategy around how to grow entire businesses. And it's a really, really cool place to be. Vicki, thank you so much for being on the show. Do you have any final piece of advice for the women in STEM that might be hearing what you have to say?
Sure. I think based on maybe that same theme is be willing to try new things. Take on as much as you can and still be successful and productive in the role that you are most passionate about, but you may be surprised about something else you get exposed to that you may have a passion for. So I think that's maybe my first piece of advice. And my second piece of advice is to own your path. As much opportunity as you have to work with others and have a mentor and have a network, it's ultimately up to you to do those things and to be accountable for where you end up. So I think that would be my final advice.
Great. Thank you. Amazing advice, and thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Women Tech Council Student Innovators Mentorship podcast series. Go to www.womentechcouncil.org for more info and subscribe to our iTunes channel for access to our ongoing series.